Hello and welcome to 5Y5. I am George Ellick doing the intro for once. Ali Maxwell has let me do it. He's normally very protective of the intros, but I know, Ali, you're feeling quite excited about what we've got up our sleeve for this week's 5Y5.
Correct.
So you wanted to introduce it because it's a special part of the season in your heart, isn't it? And it's not because it's the end of the Premier League season. It's not because we're getting to the business end of European football. There is somewhere else where your attention is going to be dominated. Where are you going to be looking in the next couple of weeks?
I'm going to lean into the mic because I want this to go straight into the ears and preferably straight into the bloodstream of anyone listening. The EFL playoffs are the single greatest sporting invention in sporting history. I love the EFL playoffs, George. I absolutely love them. The agony, the ecstasy, the pressure, the tension, the moments of drama, the winners and losers, the players that deliver, the managers that mastermind victory, the managers that get blamed for disaster. I love everything about it. Next week, starting on the 17th of May, there is a full week of playoff semi-finals. I'm talking 12 games in 7 days, wall-to-wall EFL playoff semi-final, first and second legs. I haven't been this excited for anything in a long time. I remember getting
Since
a Game
you and
Boy.
I played golf on Monday.
No, well before that. I was actually going to go back to the year 1998 when I got my first Game Boy. I think that's akin to what I'm feeling right now. And so we had to do a themed episode, an EFL playoffs themed episode. And in 5Y5 terms, well, that just means picking one player from each of the 4 championship playoff teams to tell you about in the 5Y sphere, in 5Y5 terms, and kind of give a little preview, I guess, for the playoffs themselves as well, but mostly talk about some players who you should be watching closely ahead of the end of the EFL season and see if you want to add them to your squad. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds incredible, because I love the playoffs too. You don't own them, just FYI.
Who likes Game Boys more out of the two of us? I think probably
You,
me.
although weirdly, and I think it's quite off-brand, I was quite into Pokemon at one stage. Before my brother was like, "What are you doing? That is seriously lame." And then I kind of stopped because I felt like I was lame. Anyway, we both love football, and football is definitely cool. And you're going to kick us off with your first pick from the championship playoffs.
Well, if your brother's opinion means that much to you, maybe you should ask him what he thinks about Ivan Toney, because that's who I'd like to talk about first on 5Y5. He is going to be playing up front for Brentford against Bournemouth in the playoff semi-finals. He is, I was going to say a record holder in championship terms, but I'm not sure if deep down I think goal-scoring records should only go back 15 years. There's this record that he now holds for the highest individual goal-scoring season in the second tier, but only since the rebrand, which I think was 2004. And as we know,
like a
English
false
football,
record, isn't it? Given that nothing changed.
in 1992-93, Guy Whittingham scored 40 goals for Pompey. And I think that'll be tough to get past. But Toney scored one more than Glenn Murray did a decade or so ago. So he has that record. Put it this way, he's been an absolutely sensational player this season. In 5Yards terms, he's the second most owned player on the game. So the chances are that I reckon 50% of the people listening to this, if they're playing 5Yards, have Ivan Toney in their squad. I have Ivan Toney in my squad. And I'm quite smug about this, George, because I bought him at 10 million, very near the start of the season. 63 PP returns later in the championship, which totals 1.9 million in PP returns. He's now worth 18 million. So basically 2 million back in PP and an 8 million, 80% rise in his value since that time. He's clearly been a huge success for anyone who's been on him or added him to their squad early on. But 5Y is about the future, and I think the future of Toney in 5Y terms is fascinating. Now, of course, I'm going to hold on to him for the moment, hope that Brentford are promoted or that he joins a Premier League club and gets some Premier League performance pay next season. I don't think we need a huge scouting report about Toney because he is a brilliant, modern, all-round striker, capable of playing up top on his own and coping physically, certainly with second-tier centre-backs. And I think he would have a decent day out against some of those Premier League centre-backs as well. But also has been very creative, has 10 assists this season, a lot of clever knockdowns. He's been playing in the front two in the last few weeks and seems very happy bringing others into play as well. So he's a brilliant all-round player, age 25, and we would expect him to be in the Premier League next season. Physically, he's sensational, both in terms of his upper body strength, his stamina, but also his durability. And that's a huge thing for scouts at the top level. This season has proved that beyond belief. He has played almost every minute this season. His workload has been unbelievable. Brentford have given him very few rests, and that has to be for a team that uses so much data and sports science, because his body can and has coped with it. I suppose, would you be a little concerned in the long term about the mileage that Toney has? He's already played 326 senior games, age 25. And he may be just a physical freak that lasts well into his 30s. Or he might only have 5 or 6 years left at his peak level. So that's got to be a big question. And then there's another question in terms of how much further he can develop. What we've seen from him over the last 3 years has been sensational, up there with Ollie Watkins in terms of, clear change from a player with potential to a top level player in the EFL in front of our eyes, and it's brilliant. But how much further can he go? Well, the 5Y scouts, the average rating for him over a lot of scout reports is an 81 potential, which is kind of mid-table Premier League level. That's what the scouts think is his max potential, and I kind of agree with that. I think Ollie Watkins has to be a benchmark here, not only because Toney replaced Watkins, but also because Watkins is kind of 1 year ahead, even though they're the same age. And this season, Watkins couldn't have asked for more, really, in terms of a debut season in the Premier League. 14 wins, 13 goals, 4 assists, is £4 million in performance pay. And that's a pretty solid benchmark for Toney to aspire to, purely in 5 yards terms. But Villa are a very solid mid-table team this year. Watkins has had the luxury of playing with one of the best attacking and creative players in the world, and his game, especially his mobility, has really suited the Premier League perfectly, I think it's fair to say. So the big question for Toney is, do you think he will match Watkins, both for comfort in the Premier League in terms of his ability and how his game will translate to that level, and also for luck in the sense of where he ends up, how many chances that team will create for him, and how long his stay in the Premier League will be. And I would lean towards maybe being pessimistic in comparison to Watkins for both of those things. So at the current price of 18 million, I've decided had I not owned him already, probably wouldn't buy in at this stage. I think he's gone up almost to the limit of what you could expect right now. And I'm not sure if I see him playing regular European football, which would make that price really interesting. So do I see 5 seasons in the Premier League at the level that Watkins has had? I don't think I do, and that's what you'd need to be getting over 18 million PP at this stage. Now, it's true that if they do get promoted, Brentford, or if he gets a Premier League move, you could expect a small bump in value. I'm sure he would bump up a little bit, but I'm not sure there's a huge amount higher that he could go price-wise at the moment, unless he looks like really reaching the very, very top of the game. So for me, delighted he's part of my squad. Obviously going to enjoy the ride for a little bit longer, although I could sell him now for a pretty decent profit. As for buying now at this price, I don't think I would advise it personally. The good thing about this, George, is he's already proved a lot of people wrong in his career, and maybe he can do so with me in the coming years.
I reckon he's going to pin this 5x5 on the wall.
I hope so.
And when he nails it, he's going to come to you and say, proving you wrong as well, because he seems to thrive off that.
Who would you like to tell us about? Who's heading into the playoffs and needs to be... who do we need to keep our eye on?
I'm going to talk about a Barnsley player. Now, I am a huge fan of this Barnsley side. I have a feeling they might... Well, I think they will. They are going to get to a stage where there might be 90 minutes from Premier League football. I fancy them to beat Swansea in the semis. We've spoken about Daryl DK before, so I'm not going to go back over old ground, even if he's probably the most exciting player in their squad. But an interesting one is 26-year-old captain, centre midfielder, set-piece wizard and playmaker, Alex Mowatt. Now, Mowatt's case is interesting because he's valued on 5 yards at 8.5 million, which, when he was on loan at Oxford 3 seasons ago, would have, from Barnsley. So they were the side who actually loaned him out. It wasn't a case of, he moved on afterwards. It was them who decided that he wasn't part of their plans at that time, playing in League One. I'd have been very surprised. But he's matured a lot as a player. He's somebody who has adapted incredibly well to what firstly, what Gerhard Struber wanted from his side, which included this very, very high intensity, high press football. Now, one of the criticisms that could have been levelled at him previously in his career, he's always been somebody with an excellent left foot. He's always been somebody who is not averse to the dirty side of the game. Now, whether that is getting stuck in or whether that is punching Nathan Thompson in the face after missing a penalty at Fratton Park, he's somebody who's got that competitive streak. But his fitness levels, he doesn't necessarily look like the fittest of footballers, but he gets around the park very well and he leads that press pretty well from midfield for Barnsley. But the interesting thing with Mowatt, the reason why he's a fun one here, is that he's out of contract at the end of the season. Now, he's been asked about this a lot over the past couple of months. Most recently, 2 weeks ago in the local press in Barnsley, he's just said, look, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not engaging in any contract talks until we know where we're playing next season. Now, he kind of spun that as being, I don't want to be distracted. I think it's probably more likely a case of where are Barnsley going to be next season. Yeah. Because if Barnsley do get promoted, he will be a Premier League footballer with them. I have no doubt about that. He will sign a new contract and he will probably be their captain going into next season, in which case he'll be taking penalties for a Premier League side and taking all set pieces. Now, under Valérien Ismaël, Barnsley's set piece record is incredible. They have basically their two of their three centre backs have a telepathic understanding in the box. Mads Andersen has 5 assists this season. Michael Hellick has 5 goals. Yeah, normally it's one to the other. And Mowatt is normally the person putting in the crosses. He's got 8 goals and 7 assists. He's somebody who is going to be, especially for a side getting promoted, however many goals they score, you wouldn't be surprised if his goal contribution will be just as high, because you'd think the set pieces will play a massive part in any promotion or any survival campaign that they're going to have. If Barnsley don't go up, what happens with Mowatt? Personally, I think it's probably one of 3 things. He either stays at a Barnsley side who, if they manage to keep hold of Ismaël, I think will be knocking on the Premier League's door again next season. He moves. I think if he moves, it'll be to one of 2 things. Either a top half Championship side, another side who's going to be going for the Premier League, or I wouldn't be massively surprised, given his set piece ability, if he's somebody that is attractive to somebody like a Newcastle or somebody like a Burnley, a side who basically look to get in somebody who can play. Barnsley's possession stats are very, very low. Somebody who can basically do the job he's doing at Barnsley, be creative in the middle of the park, get around the park very well, and provide that creativity too, with also kind of the eye for that spectacular goal. I think he might know that. I have a feeling, we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but I think if Alex Mowatt didn't think there was a chance that he could be playing in the Premier League for another club next season, I have a feeling he probably would have signed a new contract. So at 8.5 million, you could feasibly be getting hold of a guy on, I think there's a likelihood you're going to be buying a guy who will be on set pieces in the Premier League next season and playing a lot of football. So for that reason, given he's out of contract, I think it's a snip because he won't have to do anything. If he is lining up for Barnsley in August, or if he's lining up for a bottom half Premier League team because he's available on a free, which is, they will know that there are players who have proven it with high quality who are available for a few million quid, but on a free transfer, it's not often you get a guy who's playing this many minutes at a Championship level. And
I just wonder how likely it is that a Premier League club, even a Burnley or a Newcastle down that bottom end, signs someone on a free from the Championship who goes straight into their team. I guess that would be the concern there.
But it just normally doesn't happen. I mean, I think the reason for that is because normally you don't get players operating at his level who are out of contract. So that wouldn't really concern me. I think they'd be bringing him in to play. And I think he's good enough. I think he's not necessarily like going to go any further than that, but I think it would be a very shrewd signing for a team down there to make. And as I say, his value would go up immediately. So, they're a 7-2 chance to win the playoffs, which I think is basically value anyway. So he's 7-2 to be there anyway with Barnsley. So I think he'd be a shrewd investment both for one of those sides and also, Ali, for 5-yards users.
Good.
Get on.
Good. Well, that's what I do this for. to hear who you think is a shrewd investment on 5 yards. I'm going to talk about Connor Roberts. Now, he'll be playing against Alex Mowatt's Barnsley. He is a Swansea boy born and bred, and he plays right back for Swansea. Most of this season, he was playing right wing back in a 5 at the back system, and his attacking numbers were very eye-catching in a team towards the top of the table. At times, if I'm honest, looked like Swansea's most creative player, which seems a bit strange for a wing back. And by that, I don't mean a particularly creative passer, but rather someone who, just through sheer force of will and good delivery, and a bit of long throw as well, was probably the main source of their chances being created, which didn't reflect too well on Swansea as a side, and has kind of come back to bite them a little bit in the last part of the season, where they've really dropped off and they look like they find it very difficult to create and take their chances. But Roberts will come out of this season, whatever happens in the playoffs, with a lot of eyes on him, and with great credit. I think he's been one of Swansea's top 3 players this season for sure. 25 years old. Only really broken into Swansea's team 2 seasons ago. So I would say, just at the same age as Toney, but probably having played about 200 games fewer in his career, certainly many more miles left on the clock than I would suggest with Toney. And you know me pretty well, George. You know that I absolutely hate the sport of rugby. It's one of my least favourite things in the whole world. And I try my best to never even think about it or talk about it. But weirdly, when I think of Connor Roberts, I always think of rugby, because he is built like a centre in rugby terms. He should be playing for the Wales.
How do you know?
He should be playing for the Wales national rugby team. His build is, you just need to take a look at him galloping down the wing, and you can envisage him breaking lines in that horrendous sport. And I think those physical skills, both his strength, upper body strength, but also his speed and his stamina, those are his most eye-catching attributes. He's good technically, he's fine, but he's not amazing. And in rugby terms, just carrying the ball down the right-hand side, gaining yards for Swansea, carrying the ball from the middle third into the final third, or the defensive third into the middle third. That's what I think of when I think of Roberts at his best this season. And because of his size as well, he can be a decent threat at the back post as well if he's getting right up into the box. And in the previous system they were playing, he was spending a lot of time very, very far forward, and his return was pretty good in terms of creating chances. Now, they have since switched to 4-3-3, which means a little less time in the final third, maybe a little more responsibility defensively. And I have to admit, I haven't quite worked out how good or not Roberts is defensively. I find it hard to know at the very top level how good he would be as a Premier League fullback. But it's funny who you mentioned Mowatt as potentially being good for in the Premier League, because I think it's the case for a lot of, when you're looking at Championship players and you wonder who they'd fit in with, and you're not sure that they're good enough to settle in the middle of the Premier League table, but you think they deserve a chance. The obvious teams at the moment are the 2 that you've said, and that's who I'm going to suggest for Connor Roberts as well. Burnley and Newcastle spring to mind when I think of anyone in the Premier League who might be interested in someone like Connor Roberts. But it's difficult to know whether he would get that move this summer. I haven't seen a ton of transfer rumours about him, and my suspicion is that it's more likely he would stay at Swansea even if they don't get promoted than if he would move. But it's certainly worth keeping an eye on, because he's 7 million on 5 yards. Now, in his position at right back, you're not going to rack up a load of goal returns, a load of PP on that front. Playing in the Championship, he's not going to get really much more than 7 million if he plays in the Championship for the next, 8 years of his career. But if he was to move to the Premier League and play for 5 seasons in the Premier League, I'd expect him to get there. I just don't think that that's more likely to happen than not. So he's a funny one for me, because I'm interested to know what you think about this. Like, I don't think Connor Roberts will reach £7 million in performance pay from now to the end of his career. And that's what a 5 yards price is. It's a reflection of what our analysts and scouts think is his future performance pay. But at 7 million, which is quite low, for someone who I don't expect to play a lot lower than Championship mid-table, I think it's hard for him to lose a lot of value from that point. So there's a part of me that thinks, even though they're massive outsiders to win the playoffs, if Swansea were to get promoted, small chance. Or if he were to get a move to the Premier League, small chance. I could see like a £2 million price bump. I've been monitoring which players get bumped up, which players get bumped down. I could see that happening for Roberts if he could get a chance in the Premier League. And at such a low price, at 7 million buy price, that's a 28.5% rise in value if he was to go up to 9 million at some point. So there's a part of me that wonders where it could be a bit of a funny one, this. Even if I don't really believe that he'll get and stay at the top level, I still see there being a chance maybe of making a quick buck. Does that make any sense to you, George, or am I talking cobblers?
It makes sense. I mean, I think you could easily just back Swansea to get promoted for probably a bigger return on investment, but then you don't factor in the possibility of him moving. So, and he certainly is somebody who I could see, you know, he's that kind of player, as you mentioned, who could be available for not much money, that could be an asset. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to lose money. You could buy him now, get rid in August if he hasn't moved.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I'm going to think about that, but I just thought I'd flag it up. He's an interesting one in Swansea terms. If anyone listening fancies Swansea for promotion or thinks that Roberts' skill set means he will attract interest from the Premier League, then hopefully that's some food for thought there. He could be an interesting one. As you say, it seems unlikely that his current value of 7 million would be slashed any time in the next few years for whatever reason, barring injury. So those are 4 Championship playoff players to look out for. 3.
Those are 3.
Well, who's number 4?
David Brooks. And this is one I've picked because I don't want anyone to do anything now. I'm not going to do anything now. I want you to watch him in the playoffs and then make your own mind up, because he's an interesting case, David Brooks. He is available for 21 million. He's 23 years of age. He's a player who last summer was linked to Manchester United. Not a bad side. You know, you'd think that'd be quite a good move for him. For 21 million, you'd be sitting on a decent profit. He's somebody who's been thought of as being a pretty elite, a potentially elite level winger, who has had a terrible season in the Championship. Now, individual season, I should say. There are caveats to that before people get angry. I read an article in the Bournemouth Echo this morning that suggested that we know that he's had injuries this season, but there was a mention of illness as well. Now, I can't find any talk of David Brooks being ill at any stage this season previously, no COVID stuff or anything like that. So this would suggest that maybe something was going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, which would explain quite a great deal of some pretty lackluster displays, really. Like, he wasn't impacting games at all. That revelation was made in an interview with Jonathan Woodgate after Brooks put in his one and only truly dominant performance against Millwall a couple of weeks ago, where he was absolutely brilliant. And Woodgate said there, you know, he's had injuries, he's had this illness, we're now going to see the best of him. He's been far, far more energetic off the ball. You know, he's somebody who has that to his game, that kind of tenacity, despite not having the physical shape to really do it. So what I'm thinking here is, if there are reasons for this poor season, are we going to see a different David Brooks in the playoffs? You know, is he trending in the right direction now? Is he going to be physically fit finally to really impact it in the way that he should? Because he should be basically one of the best players in the playoffs in terms of his talent. If Bournemouth go up, of course, and he plays well, then I think you're going to be onto a winner. If he plays well and Bournemouth don't go up, then there is always the opportunity or the chance that those sides will come in for him again. Remember, I know that Bournemouth have a wealthy owner, but as the parachute payments start to fizzle away, you've kind of got to cut your cloth accordingly, and therefore moving on a 23-year-old winger who hasn't had a particularly good season to sides who will still value him as a big talent could be a way to go. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to point out the potential issues that have surrounded his season, which might not be factored into his price, which might make him an interesting prospect. So basically, if you watch him against Brentford and he's tearing it up, maybe then pull the trigger. If he's not, then, you know, steer clear.
Love it. Okay. Well, just to finish off, our fifth player slot is going to be taken up, just running you through who's heading up on 5 yards this week. Another group of players, 11 in total. And I love doing this every week because it's just always, it's just such a varied group. We've got Borja Mayoral, who plays for Roma, to kick us off. And then we go straight into someone who could be anything from the EFL. George, you've actually spoken about his brother on this show. You've spoken about Carney Chukwuemeka, who is ripping it up for the Aston Villa youth team. And his brother Caleb plays for Northampton Town. And he's got a few minutes this season, not a ton. And you just wonder if a relegation to League Two with a player who's clearly if he's got anything like the talent of his brother, got a future in the game, could be good news for Caleb Chukwuemeka. Might we be talking about him as a bit of a League Two breakthrough talent next season? Regardless, he's going up on 5 yards. Can't wait to see what price Chukwuemeka is. Devine Wrench, fullback for Ajax. Dion Sanderson, centre-back for Sunderland. I think he's on loan from Wolves, isn't he? He's really impressed this season. Sunderland haven't been the same team since he's been injured. So at 21, he heads back to Wolves in an interesting spot. It seems like difficult to imagine that Wolves would find a place for him next season. But having said that, they've got plenty of questions to answer at the back. So who knows? He certainly has. He's done very, very well this season, Sanderson. Jack Taylor of Peterborough United, they've been promoted. So Taylor, the central midfield player who they bought from Barnet, will be playing in the Championship just 2 years after playing in the National League. A real sort of do-it-all central midfielder type. And definitely one to watch. Another great Peterborough signing that. Kieran Trippier of Atletico Madrid, he heads up. Will he be going to the Euros with England? I hope so. Nat Phillips, the Liverpool centre-back, he's going on site as well. Stanley Mills, apparently is a current and modern-day winger for Everton, but he sounds more like a 1950s England international to me. Hopefully he's a future England international. I know nothing about Stanley Mills, but I'm looking forward to some scout reports going up on him so that I can teach myself. And to finish us off, Terem Moffi from Lorient, Tom Bloxham, who is a giant of a 17-year-old centre-forward who's played the last couple of games for Shrewsbury Town, made his debut just in the last few weeks of the season. And then the best of the lot, George, the best name, and probably the player with the biggest future, Zidane Iqbal of Manchester United. He is an 18-year-old creative, skillful midfield player, the sort of player that stands out a lot at youth level. And we wait to see what happens in the future of his career. He's going up on 5 yards as well. So if you know about the United youth system and you like the look of Zidane Iqbal, we'll make sure that you're writing scout reports straight away when he's up later on this week. But that's it from us. Thank you for listening to this week's 5x5. Hopefully you're as excited about the EFL playoffs as we are. But of course we've got Europa League and Champions League finals to come. A really exciting last few weeks of the season. And then time to take a short breath before the Euros begin. So lots to look forward to. Make sure that you're popping on to 5 yards every single day and dropping some scout reports down on players that you know well and thinking about those that you might like to buy or sell into or out from your squad. We've been Ali and George. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk again soon.